This is the day you've all been waiting for. Yes, it's finally time to install my 314mm performance brakes on my 2009 Saab 9.5 Griffin. Currently on the car in the front are the 308mm Aero spec brakes. Pretty decent brakes, but I want to get something better and bigger. Therefore I have the 314mm performance brakes from the 9.3 Aero. So this is a retrofit. You can take parts from another Saab, buy them quite cheaply and put them on the Saab 9.5. You can see I have the winter wheels on. These are 16-inch rims and there's not much space here between the brake caliper and the rim. So it might be that the 314mm brakes are simply too big for these rims. We'll just have to see. Alright, off with the wheel. Oh, why can't I have an impact wrench at home? This is just so awesome. We are now breaking loose the big bolts on the backside of the spindle that holds the caliper to the spindle. You will need an E20 socket. This is for the Saab 9.5 from 2002 and onwards. And I don't know the size of the previous generation, but you'll have to look it up for yourself. And I don't have an impact socket, so I'll only be using hand tools. The upper bolt is the most difficult one since there are some brake hoses here in the way that you're not supposed to damage. Also, I'm sorry, I thought I had started the video and showed you guys when breaking them loose, but apparently the camera wasn't running. So the bolts have been broken loose and I'm currently removing them from the spindle. These bolts are fastened with a very high torque spec from factory, and also they use Loctite, which means that even when you've broken them loose, they're hard to get off. There's also not much angle where you can turn. I'm lucky I'm on a lift, which means I can turn them quite far down. But if you're using hand tools like I am, you will need to do some manual work. It's also hazardous to use a ratcheting handle since this torque is higher than what most ratchets can handle. I'm using my big, long breaker bar. It has served me well for many difficult jobs. And this is one of them. Okay, I'm switching to the ratcheting handle. It should be fine by now. There you go, big and beefy bolt with a lot of blue Loctite on it. I'm now removing the clip that holds the brake hose to the spindle. Clip is gone. Now the bolt is almost out, so therefore we almost have the brake caliper loose. However, we must remove the tension on the brake pads onto the brake rotor, otherwise we won't be able to get the caliper off. So I'll be pushing back the piston ever so slightly using this large pair of pliers. There we go. I just need the slightest of movement. And now we completely remove the bolt. It's out. And we are free. And if you're wondering, I hung the caliper up here in the coil spring. It was a little bit difficult to do all by myself, so I'm sorry for the bad camera angles there for a moment. Now I'm going to try to attach the new, bigger brake calipers before I do anything else. Why do I do this? Well, I want to see if my rims will still fit over the bigger brakes. Please fit, please fit, please fit, please fit. Nervous. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. I mean, you guys are cheering for me, right? If this doesn't fit, I'm a bit screwed. I promised you guys the brake job, and I want to make a brake job for you. Can we turn the wheel? You see that? It's working! Yay! I was actually quite nervous last night thinking about this job today. But you know guys, I think this is a green light for me. I'll go ahead and do the replacement. And now that we're good to go, let's continue by removing the brake rotor. You might have noticed that the Saab uses wheel bolts. This means there's nothing holding the brake rotor to the spindle right now except for this set screw. So when we remove the screw, then hopefully the brake rotor will be loose. I'm using a 5mm Allen wrench. For once, Saab uses an Allen key here. Otherwise it's almost only Torx bolts. And I've heard that these can be quite nasty to get off. Okay, hand tools didn't work. I'm gonna try with the impact. No, this is probably not an impact tool, but it's my own. If I break it, it's just on me. Ah, victory! I didn't have to put too much torque on the bolt, therefore it worked without breaking. It's time to get the rotor off. And there she goes. Now guys, I have to confess, this is my first brake job. Never done this before, so see this video as more of a follow along than a step-by-step DIY guide. I'm now going to clean off the hub area entirely, and then we're gonna try to see if our 340mm discs will fit or if I'll have to cut the dust shield. I just love these air tools. And now then we finally have the 314mm brake rotors. I've been waiting months for this moment. I'm just gonna test fit them for now. It's a very tight fit, sometimes like only a millimeter of space. These rotors are slotted and I'm fitting them in this direction, so when the wheel turns, it moves like this. No matter what anyone says on the forums, the direction does not matter except for the aesthetics. Right, so the dust shield does fit, but it's too close for my taste. If we get like a grain of sand or something in here, it will make horrible noises. I think we'll just hammer the dust shield back a little bit so it doesn't touch the brake rotor. Let's see if a hammer does the trick. You can tell from the scrape marks here on the backside. Well, I think that the hammer trick worked well for the rotors. Now we have plenty of clearance to the brake shield. So why am I not fitting dust shields that actually fit the rotor? Well, the thing is, removing dust shields is quite annoying since you have to remove the hub. And we're in the rust belt and everything might be difficult. I'll have to remove the axle nut. Let's keep this simple, and I want to keep the guide simple too. So just use the hammer or a grinding wheel or cutting disc or whatever and make it fit. And now let's try the calipers. Okay, no clearance issues whatsoever. Dust shield is fine. And then of course I need to remove the pins from the carrier. Otherwise I won't be able to fit the caliper onto the carrier. 7mm Allen wrench. Caliper goes on. We're still just testing, not final assembly yet. So we don't have the brake pads in at the moment. I insert the glide pins. And there we are. That's the brake caliper and the caliper carrier with the brake rotors mounted. But as you can hear, we do have interference between the caliper and the dust shield. Let me show you. So caliper, dust shield, and when the caliper moves around, it interferes with the shield. So I'll now use a marker, mark it off here, take everything out, and then cut the shield away. It's like a little ear, like a triangle. I'm gonna cut it off entirely. That should do the trick, both on the upper side and the lower side. So let's get cutting. So another little test fit just to make sure. As you can see, we have about 5 millimeters of clearance on the top side and 3 to 4 millimeters on the lower side. Now the caliper can move back and forth freely without interfering with the shield. So I'd say we are ready to mount. This means I'm going to clean everything off once again. Even the smallest speck of dirt here on the hub face can actually have a great impact on the skewness of the rotor. And I don't want pulsating brakes from this, so I need to be very careful. And just a tiny, tiny amount of anise. I'm basically just moisturizing the surface, nothing more. I'm cleaning off just the hub area of the rotor. Don't worry, I'll clean the rotor surface next. Line it up. And then add a brand new bolt with a bit of anise and tie it down. We'll clean off the surface. Remember that the new rotors almost always come with a special oil on it to prevent rust while transporting. Now I know I have a paper cloth, but unfortunately I don't have a lint-free cloth with me, so this will have to do. Clean off the back surface. Okay, so now I think it's finally time to remove the old caliper and get it out of the way. But this requires me to remove the brake hose, and I can't reuse this brake hose since the 314 calipers use a different type of hose. I'll show you in a bit. So when I remove it now, brake fluid is gonna come down, so I put a big catch can under the brake system, which should catch any brake fluid. Weird enough, this is an 11 millimeter bolt head. I'm just gonna use the impact wrench here. And out comes the brake fluid. Nasty stuff, man. Really nasty stuff. Bolt seems to be in pretty good shape. Now we can remove the caliper altogether. Next, we want to remove the brake hose from the connector to the brake line. We remove the clip that holds the ABS cable to the brake line. So I put a bolt here with the old washers and a nut just to prevent too much brake fluid from leaking out. You can also depress the brake pedal like 5 centimeters and pull the fuse for the brake light in the rear. That will also prevent excess brake fluid from leaking out. And the reason why we're replacing the brake hoses in the first place is because the 314 millimeter brake calipers have a different size bolt here at the banjo side. Now I've splurged a little more. I think you guys will like this. These are steel-braided brake lines manufactured by HEL. And I bought a blue transparent color, which I think will look great with the yellow caliper and the red car. And you can see there are 6 brake lines in this kit. That's because there are 2 brake lines per side in the rear. But in order to install the new brake lines, we need to get the old hose off the car. And this can be slightly hazardous. I've been doing some reading, and you need an 11mm flare nut wrench, a special type of wrench that I'll show you briefly. You need to hold the brake hose nut down here and then turn the brake line nut up here. Now this is the tool I'm talking about. I had to go out and buy it since neither I nor this garage had it. It needs to be of an 11mm size, and that one I will use up here. I'm also going to use a hammer. Very carefully I rest the hammer on the brake line nut, and then I carefully tap it with another hammer. Basically the idea is to shake loose any rust that we might have. Then I'm using a 17mm open-ended spanner, and then we're going to use the flare nut wrench on the nut on the top. Here goes nothing. I think we can call that success. Okay, I had to do some off-camera fiddling. The last thing I showed you was that I got the nut loose, but then the brake line rotated with the nut, which was very bad because I couldn't rotate it very much. In the meantime, I removed the clip. It's on the upper side, you pull it out. It might be hard to see because there's so much dirt and debris up here, but you pull it out, might need some convincing to do it, but in the end it works. And next, the hose itself was almost fused to the fastener here, or whatever you call this little thing that holds it in. So even after removing the clip, it was just stuck. In the end, I took a pair of pliers and pulled on this round thing up here, wiggled it back and forth until it came loose. The difficult thing here is that this retainer, or whatever it's called, is not stuck very hard to the car, so you have to be careful so you don't break it. And the idea now is that I will rotate the hose, and this will release the threads, and I can remove the brake hose. Now I couldn't turn the nut, obviously, because that one was stuck to the brake line. So I just have to turn the hose itself until we're all done. So just to show you guys, here is a nut. I think that one was a 17mm. You hold this while you turn the nut on the brake line. But this one cannot be turned since it's basically fused to the fastener here in the car. Instead, I took a pair of pliers, gripped here, importantly not on the nut, wiggled it back and forth until it broke loose from the car. And then the clip sits in this indentation here. Everything is dirty and rusty even though the car is pretty clean, so this might give you some trouble. I should also say that in the meantime I've used a lot of penetrating oil. I even used a little bit of heat from a heat gun. I didn't want to use a propane torch or anything else because I feared something might catch on fire. And there's a lot of stuff around here. But now I'm going to use brake clean to clear off the threads and to get everything clean around here. And here is my awesome new steel-braided brake line. This is a special hose used for converting the Saab 9.5 to the Saab 9.3 314mm. The manufacturer is HEL of this transparent blue. You can choose from many different colors. And I bought this kit from Saab in the UK. I'll give a link down in the video description. I paid 99 UK pounds for this one, which I think is a fairly good price for the whole kit of 6 brake lines, front and rear. So I'm going to do the opposite now to what I did before. I'm inserting the brake line from below. I had to pull down slightly on the brake line to get it to the correct height, as it seems the new brake hoses are a bit lower. And then I'm simply screwing it in until it bottoms out. I'm going to use the flare nut wrench to hold the brake line nut while screwing the brake hose into the threads. And this is a 17mm open-ended spanner. I'll do this until it bottoms out, and then I'll fasten it by turning the nut and not the hose. Normally you would turn the nut on the line, but since that's fused to the line now, instead I have to turn on the hose itself. Okay, it's starting to bottom out, so now I'll hold the hose and then give it a tug here with the flare nut wrench. I think that's good. Just have to get it up slightly more. and you see a little lip on the brake hose, and then you push the clip on. And with the clip back on, I think we got the hardest part of this job under control. Be careful of the lines, they're difficult to replace. I don't have neither the tools, nor the time, nor the skills to do this. Now we put the ABS line back on. I think it was just a matter of clipping it on. Yes, there it goes. It's a bit loose, but I think that's just because the brake hose is a bit different than before. Maybe I'll use a cable tie to tighten it down further. Next, we attach the brake line to the bracket, and it goes in here just like before. Now we need to make sure that the brake line isn't tugging or snagging or anything, so we can actually turn the wheel back and forth. Yes, I need to add the metal clip here too. Give me a sec. Well, with the metal clip on, it seems to be tighter, so that's good, I guess. And after we attach the caliper, I will check the movement and the clearance of the hose. Let's reinstall the calipers. I will remove the glide pins from the caliper karis using the 7mm Allen wrench. So before, when I test fitted, I used the Saab 9.5 Torx bolts. You see they're really big and beefy, but now we're going to move to the 9.3 bolts. They're just as beefy, but a bit shorter. The reason for this is because the brake rotors are thicker, and these ones, I have been told, can collide with the brake rotor. We still have the same E20 Torx head, and I'll be using a slight bit of anti-seize on these bolts. Now I screwed the bolts in hand tight, but I've got a feeling that these bolts didn't thread too many turns before they bottomed out. So I'm removing the lower bolt again. And I'll try with the 9.5 bolts once again, just to see how much they actually stick out. And as I'm turning, I'm looking between the brake rotor and the caliper carrier to see if the bolt sticks out. And yes, it does. I haven't bottomed out yet, but I can definitely see the bolt touching against the caliper carriers. So we can confirm that the 9.5 bolts are too long, but at the same time it feels like the 9.3 bolts are so short. How many turns do I even get of thread? I mean, look at this, I'm turning and turning and turning the 9.5 bolts. Should be a number of turns before stopping, right? Well, this is too little. Look here. The bolt goes in. 1, 2, and 2.5 turns. That's it. That's all the thread I get from the shorter bolts. This can't be right. Impossible. I'm sure that if I use maybe like a washer on the 9.5 bolts, they will work. This is just too short. I've been doing a bit of thinking. We're approaching the end of today, so I'll just attach the shorter 9.3 bolts for now. And before we drive the car, I'm still gonna get the longer bolts to fit. I'm gonna find a washer or two to fit over these. Apparently this is what some people do, but at the same time I see people working with the 308 bracket bolts without any issues, so I don't know why. But at least we can get the caliper carrier attached reasonably well for now. I'm just gonna tighten them down by hand. I will not torque them down yet. Let's clean the rotors off once again. This time I do have a cloth made out of fabric and not paper. Yay! And we can now move over to the calipers and the brake pads. Now here's the brake caliper and here are the brake pads. Unfortunately, Speed Parts shipped all this stuff in a box with a lot of cardboard shavings to keep them safe, but all of this got stuck in the grease on the pads and I'll have to clean them off. But now let's put everything together here. We are working on the left side of the car. Calipers sit like this. The rotor will rotate like this in the forward direction, which means that when we put it down, it's going to rotate like this. Now it's a bit hard to know which pad goes where. According to the workshop manual, there should be an arrow on this brake pad with this big clip pointing in this direction. I don't see an arrow, but there is a difference between the two types of springs on the back of the pads. And according to the illustration, this type of spring goes into the piston and the other type goes on the outside. But first I'm going to lube this up so we don't get any squeals. I've got myself a tube of ATE Plastilube. Again, ATE is the brake manufacturer and this seems to be the stuff that they recommend. I just want a tiny bit. And then a slight dab on the ear. Done. Done. I'm also adding a tiny bit of grease to the corresponding sides on the caliper. Let's install the pads. I am avoiding touching the actual brake pad surfaces so I don't contaminate them with any grease. This is done, and now we install the caliper onto the caliper carrier. First we need to remove the dust boot. And that's where the pins go. Next, we deal with the glide pins. If you're reusing some stuff, be sure to clean them up nicely. All my hardware is brand new, so there shouldn't be a problem, except I have a tiny bit of paint here. I'm going to use just a bit of sandpaper to remove that, then clean them off with brake clean, and then use a special silicone grease just very lightly around the pins so they glide nicely in the caliper. Get them all nice and clean. And I just have a small packet with 5 grams of silicone grease. Now don't overdo the grease. Too little and the calipers may seize, and too much and the calipers may also seize. Done. Let's get back to the car. Before we do anything else, I'm adding the tiniest bit of grease to the caliper carriers. Just these ears here. And then we install the caliper. Oh yes. I'm holding the caliper in, and then I insert the glide pins. Glide pins are in, I'll torque them down as soon as I have the brake hose attached. Something else I had to figure out was which caliper goes on the left side and which one goes on the right side. In fact, there are no markings on the caliper that tell you. No part number, no left or right symbol, nothing. Instead, I'm going by the illustration in the workshop manual where I can see that the bleed nipple is above the brake hose connector. In the hose kit from HEL, we have 2 banjo bolts and 6 copper washers, 4 washers for the front and 2 washers for the back. So we add a copper washer of the bigger type to the banjo bolt, pull it through the hose, add another copper washer, and then we attach it to the caliper. Apparently I forgot to remove the plastic plug from the caliper. Well, I guess it's best to do it as late as possible. You don't want dirt in your hydraulic system. It's off. Now attach the banjo bolt. This is a 16mm head. Hey Jonathan, why are you wearing your winter hat? It's freaking cold, okay? I can't run the heaters when I'm shooting because that would disturb the sound. And now let's ensure we have free movement of the brake hose. Time to torque all these bolts. For the glide pins we need 28 Newton meters. I hope you guys really appreciate that I'm giving you the best view. I can't see anything from my angle. And then for the banjo bolt we need 40 Newton meters. Finally, 40 Newton meters felt like an eternity. I guess those copper washers are very well crushed by now, just as they should be. Final step is to attach the locking spring. According to the manual, we attach the top and middle sides first, and here you can see a little tab that goes inside a hole in the spring on the brake pad. The manual warns you about this. The spring has a lot of power in it. There we go. It's a bit harder than I thought. You need to push down both sides and the middle at the same time, and then it snaps into this little locking tab on the middle. And with that, my 2009 Saab 9.5 Griffin has 314mm brakes from the Saab 9.3. Awesome, awesome stuff. I think the process went relatively trouble-free, but of course there are some things you need to modify to make this fit. We have talked about the brake dust shield here on the backside, and the amount of cutting you need to do depends on the type of brakes this car has stock. I had the Aerospec 308mm brakes, so I only had to cut a little bit on the ears, up and down, and do some hammering to get it back slightly. If you have the smaller brakes, you might need to do some more modification. You might even have to remove them altogether or install the 314mm dust shields. I don't really know in that case. The only real trouble I had was with the brake lines. Let me show you. On the top side the brake line fits, it's not going anywhere, but the ABS wire has its own retainer, a plastic retainer, that no longer fit with the new brake line. Therefore I had to use zip ties to make it stay put. If we go further down, you can see the bracket that holds the ABS line with the brake line further down on the spindle, and here the metal clip doesn't really stay put anymore. This rubber thing here on the brake line is smaller than on the stock lines, so I had to use zip ties to make the clip stay on the bracket here. This is not the best solution, so if you guys have any suggestions for how to improve this, please let me know. Be sure to check that the brake line can go snag-free when turning and when the suspension is moving, and then you're good to go. And in order to finalize the install of the calipers, I had to get myself a set of washers. I bought these 3mm thick stainless steel washers, and I'm showing this on the 9.3 bolts. Remember that the 9.5 bolts already have an included washer that is fixed to the bolt. So in total you'll have 2 washers, and then you put the 9.5 bolts with these washers in the correct position. These bolts, according to the specs, are supposed to be very, very tight. The torque spec is 210 Newton meters, and that's quite a lot. I don't know how easy that is to do without a lift. And then you're further supposed to do 30 more degrees. And trust me, doing this by hand was quite strenuous when you don't want to slip off the bolts or damage, say, the brake lines or something. So do not buy these 9.3 caliper bolts, they are too short. Yes, they will thread in, but that's like 2 turns of thread, and that's everything that holds your brakes to your car in that case. While up on lift, I took the opportunity to replace these sway bar end links, and I hope this will cure some of the front end noise I've been having. But that's it for this brake job. Be sure to check out my video on how to paint brake calipers in this nice yellow paint. I like the looks of the slotted rotors, and they're also coated, which means they're painted in the hub and in the ventilation. Prevents corrosion. Now this kit will fit Saab 9.5's model year 2002 to 2010. And a very frequent question I've gotten is, how do I make this kit fit the earlier 9.5s or the original generation Saab 9.3s, the coupes? And what you need is a different caliper carrier, i.e. this part. With the earlier models, they have the brake bolts, I think they're closer together or something. They beefed up the front end for the 2002 model year. Rumor has it that there does exist caliper carriers for the 9.3 and the early 9.5s, but I don't know if you can buy them or if they are available anywhere. Sorry guys, I really would like to know the answer myself. The last step now is to bleed the brake lines, but I'll wait for this until I've finished my rear brakes also. But that's for a separate video. Thank you very much for watching Trionic 7. I hope to see you guys soon again. Check out our socials. Check out the video on how to paint your brake calipers with heat-resistant paint. In the meantime, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye!